anything? Like, tongue a little bit in cheek here, right? Because the news is the news. But I do remember times in my life when the news cycle was happier. Radio days when you'd be like, well, I got nothing to talk about, so let's just open the lines and talk with people about their favorite pizza restaurant, which, yes, I actually did on more than one occasion on those times when the news was slow. And I'll confess, we got some good pizza recommendations out of them. So a win's a win, I guess. All right now, Raywat Deonandan is joining me here, global health epidemiologist and associate professor with the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Raywat, everyone has a better title than I do. It's very hard for me to do this show over the last couple of years because everybody I'm bringing on is like an expert of a different kind. Like, I'm just a guy with a microphone, and everyone else has got like 9 degrees and 7 institutional affiliations. So nice to have
you can buy
here.
a title. I bought the title of Lord of a fake country, so you can buy one.
Okay, Vivian, take a note of that. All right, we'll talk about that after the show. Let's see if we can get a budget line for that. So let's talk about a couple things here. I mean, I don't know how worried I should be about monkeypox. Like, can you give me an easy answer on that? Because everyone's assuring me that everything's fine and there's nothing to worry about. But the problem is we spent January and February of 2020 being told the risk was low. So what's your level of concern these days?
Yeah, I mean, the official answer is don't worry about it until it's time to worry about it and let public health worry about it now. And we'll let you know when it's time for you to worry about it. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it like a 3, maybe a 2. And the reason for that is we've been primed to think about infectious diseases for the last couple of years, and everyone is sort of an expert on it to some extent. And so we think about monkeypox like it's COVID. It's not COVID. It's a whole different game. It's more lethal than COVID, absolutely, but we have a lot of advantages over monkeypox than we did with COVID. We're not naive to it. We have a vaccine that works. We have treatments that work. We know how it's spread. We know how to recognize it, and we know what probably the long-term consequences are. So I'm not overly worried about it yet, but let's check in a couple weeks and see how things are.
Is monkeypox still behaving like monkeypox? I mean, that's the only real concern about this thing. I did my instant crash course on monkeypox, so now I'm a self-proclaimed expert, obviously, just like 40 million other Canadians. It seems like monkeypox is, as you said, lethal, but relatively difficult to transmit, especially compared to something like the new COVID variants here. Are we getting any indication that it has in some way become easier to transmit, or are we just catching kind of like a streak of bad luck here, like where we happen to have an outbreak at a time and a place when it was easy for it to transmit, and now we're dealing with the aftermath?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is we don't know. And the reason we're asking the question, of course, is that we have these outbreaks around the world that don't seem to be linked to any particular original source from Africa, where monkeypox is most commonly seen. So it's probably due to simply an undetected transmission route, having to do with travel perhaps, but it might be due to a greater aerosolization. Monkeypox is suspected to have an airborne component, as do most diseases, frankly. There's a paper from a few years ago that explores the aerosolization capacity of monkeypox. Maybe it's become a little more so, but I think it's way too premature to make that conclusion. It's probably more likely that we just haven't been looking for it as diligently as we could because we've never seen it, except for this one time in 2003 outside of Africa. So as our surveillance capacity improves, we'll get a better handle on exactly what's going on.
I don't want you to think I'm making light of this. Like, I swear to God, I don't mean to ask this question flippantly, but I'm imagining another difference between COVID, which in many cases presented, if there were symptoms at all, it was like, mild respiratory infection. Like, COVID in many cases did not present with significant symptoms when it presented at all. I'm guessing anyone shows up at their GP with monkeypox, the doctor's going to realize something's up.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, and that's an advantage in many ways. 2 ways, actually. First is that people are more scared of the aesthetic impacts of a disease than they are of the respiratory impacts of a disease, weirdly so. So COVID, if you've got it, it's probably invisible on you, whereas monkeypox leaves a scar. It can leave a scar anyway. And that's an advantage epidemiologically because we can identify those people who have it, and you've had it, therefore you're likely immune after you've had it. So there are a few advantages there. But yeah, if you think you've got it, you probably had a fever, you've probably been exposed to someone who had it, and you have these pretty obvious rashes, these circular marks on your extremities, your face and your hands and your feet.
I mean, again, without for a second wanting to sound like I'm being glib about this, I mean, I would probably rather be up against a disease that is really obvious in its presentation than something like COVID when for all we know, 1 million people were walking around not even knowing that they had it in the first place. So I want to, speaking of COVID, obviously we'll keep our eye on the monkeypox thing. I will expect you to shoot me a DM if there's anything really to worry about, and I'll flee to the countries. I'll have my flee to the countryside plan on standby the last 2 years, so it's good to go. I just need a tip-off. What about COVID right now? I mean, hospitalization in Canada, Ontario specifically, Canada broadly, is improving here. You and your colleagues are starting to look at, I guess, wastewater as sort of our early warning of what might be going on here. I find that absolutely fascinating. Like, it's such an interesting opportunity. But as you and some of your colleagues have been observing, it's kind of a new thing, and we're going to have to think about how to use that technology thoughtfully and effectively, but also in a way that protects people and their privacy.
Yeah, as David Fistman has in his pinned tweet, poop is the new air. We think about poop all the time now. And it's a powerful, powerful tool, but it's a broad sword. It's not a scalpel. So we can identify enclaves of likely cases of infection, but not individual necessarily. There is some concern about the ethics of using it because you can't identify neighborhoods, for example, where likely infection arises. But it's a powerful tool, useful now, particularly because we don't do widespread testing anymore. So there are essentially 3 or 4 ways that we keep track of this disease now. Number 1 is looking at the test positivity rates of the tests that do occur. Number 2 is looking at the sentinel surveillance. That's when we test everyone who walks through a place like a hospital. Number 3 is modeling, which we are quite familiar with now. And number 4 is the wastewater testing, which is gaining in power and popularity. It's inexpensive, it's powerful, and it's real time. And you capture those cases of people who don't even know they're infected because you're probably pooping out viral load before you are testable. And we can detect that in the sewage.
What are the privacy concerns of that here? I'm just curious here. I mean, at a bulk population sampling level, I mean, are there privacy concerns with something like sewage analysis, or is that almost sort of the ideal situation where you get useful real-time data and none of it is linked to an individual?
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive, but there might be a privacy concern here. So looking at an entire neighborhood, if I tell you that there's someone in this neighborhood with COVID, or there's a handful of people or an outbreak in this neighborhood, you might be stigmatizing that neighborhood, that community, that apartment building, that campus. You can't probably narrow it down to an individual person. You might be in an extreme situation, be able to narrow it down to like the floor of an apartment building, which can be stigmatizing. In general, though, I think the privacy concerns are overblown, but they're there. When we look at these sort of things, we have to weigh the public health utility of the intervention versus the risk to liberties and to the social good. I think the public health good far, far outweighs the potential for the overstepping into people's privacy issues. I think that's a bit overstated, but we have to keep our eye on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how big of a science fiction fan you are, but everything sounds like a good idea until it becomes dystopic. I mean,
yeah.
We very rarely set out deliberately to do bad things. Normally we have brilliant new ideas, and then we find out later, whoops, we've destroyed civilization.
Oh, yes. I teach global health, and one of my lessons I always confer upon my students is every single technological intervention meant to solve a problem, every single one creates more social problems. That's not to say you shouldn't attempt it. It's just to say you got to keep your eye on the potential negative impacts of what you're doing and have plans in place to mitigate those impacts. So as long as we're doing this sensitively and with an eye towards protecting those people we might deleteriously impact, I think it's fine.
See, it sounds so easy when you say it, but why do I get the feeling we don't always live up to that standard? All right. On that cheerful note, I will let you go. Thanks for the update. I will expect you, when your monkeypox alert level hits like 5 out of 10, just pop me a note, all right?
Deal.
All right, have a good one. Thanks for coming on.
Bye-bye.